welcome to the TFC Racing Channel. I'm your host, Gary Forbes. Today we got a special guest, a new special guest, not Brian Biddy, as we have for all the previous ones. Today, the other fast guy who I refer to, Zafar Siddiqui, who is a teammate, and you might recognize him if you're a B cat or an A cat as the yellow blur that flies by you at the end of the races. But today he's just a guy sitting in a chair helping us analyze a video. So Z, say what's up.
Yeah, definitely not Diddy. Trying to fill some big shoes here on the other side of the camera, but yeah, looking forward to analyzing this race and seeing what went well, what we could improve on. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. So today we're going to look at actually somebody else's video. We got a third party here. We're going to watch Will Miller, who we've put up one or two of his videos already on this channel. You might remember a couple of them, but it's this handsome devil who we're zooming in to see right here. He has been kind enough to let us use his footage, and he is letting Z and I analyze, dissect, suggest, and everything. And we're going to try to be as polite as we can, because honestly, compared to where he was even a few weeks ago, he has made just dramatic improvements. So not to spoil anything, but he did a good job in this race. And a few weeks ago, you'll remember this was him in McCurry, casually letting himself get dropped before the first climb.
This was painful to watch, definitely.
It was. I think he was trying out some new things and it didn't quite take, but he was real strong in this race. Obviously, he's got some legs, but this was tactically not the way to go. So what we want to do is basically just start from there, see what he did in this race, and then continue to suggest some things that he can do to improve. So what we're going to start off with basically is just let's look at his power profile. You do this probably more than anybody. So tell me what you see here.
He has a pretty high FTP. That's right off the bat for a B category. He's at 4.1, 318 watts. So I would assume on a flat race with sprints in between that he should be able to recover relatively well between those sprints. So he should be able to get most of that 10 watts per kilo out during the sprints is kind of what it translates to. So that's what I'm seeing here. I would say like his strategy going into this race probably should be maybe sneak an FTS if he times that 11 watts per kilo or 10.5 watts per kilo perfectly with an aero power up, or really as people start to get tired in the race, try to drop the aero maybe early and go for some FAL points, first across the line points, because he may not have the best kick in the race, but he definitely has a little bit of a punch to him. So that's kind of what I would advise him going into the race.
First sprint coming up here, he's comfortably in the middle of the pack. No power up on this one because we haven't gone through a banner yet. So, what do you think? Does he go for anything here, or just make sure he stays forward and stays in the front?
Yeah, I think it's not a mistake to go for something here. If I were to go for something here, it would be FAL 100%. I think without a power up, it's nearly impossible in a downhill sprint without an aero to get an FTS, especially if you don't have above and beyond watts and everyone else does compared to the field. So, I don't think he's making a mistake here. Just making sure he's comfortably within the packs. You still have to sprint just to make sure you're in the middle of the pack coming down this descent. And that's exactly what he does. So he doesn't really go for the FAL. And I don't know if he was going for FTS, but, like I said, I think it would be close to impossible without a power up at that point.
Yeah, and probably for everybody in this field too. I mean, you saw the top of the group there was only mid 13s for that, which is it's not nothing, but it's certainly not.
It's going to come down.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect that to hold up for the whole race, especially going into this is the lead-in lap, and this coming lap will be lap 1. So this coming lap, I would expect, is probably where a fair percentage of racers put their best times up because they're fresher, they're still a bigger pack. If they got lucky enough to have an aero, then they'd be using it there. Unfortunately, Will got another steamroller, and what do you think here? He used it right away.
Yeah, it's one thing if you're kind of on the edge trying to recover, you need any kind of help just to get you, to stay in the pack. But he's at a comfortable heart rate here, 149, 150. The steamroller, I would say actually on this course, surprisingly, was probably the worst power up to have in a sprint, just because it doesn't add that much to your speed on cobbles. But at the same time, it's not nothing, right? So I would have definitely saved it for the hardest bit, which is the sprint, especially if you're going for any FAL, FTS. It'll probably shave off, help you with like 30 to 40 watts at those speeds. And that's when everyone's going hard. That's when the race is hard. So you want to give yourself the most help then, is what I would say.
Right.
And yeah, I would like to hear what, his kind of point of view. Maybe he just wanted to recover even more, but that's probably, I would advise to probably use it at the hardest bits of the races.
Right. My philosophy generally for these things, for power up usage overall, and it's not always going to be the case, but you either use it to save yourself from getting dropped or to
Right.
attack in some form. So attack doesn't necessarily have to mean you make a long range attack to try and put a gap in between you and the field. Attack could mean, hitting the sprint as hard as you can for FAL or FTS. But he was in no
Or
danger of getting dropped there. He was sitting middle of the pack. So maybe that was an accident because, he fast forwarding through this, he won't do that again, at least not at that particular location. So maybe he just accidentally hit it. I think he uses an iPhone that he's got mounted to the front of his handlebar, so it could be a sweat drop that hit it or something along those lines. But
I think that's happened to all of us. I will say another use of power up too is really when other people are attacking. So just to respond to other people's attacks. So even if you're not going for FAL, FTS, you might have to drop an arrow just to make it easier for you to stay with the group in case you feel like you're going to get dropped. One more thing I will say, just rewinding a little bit about that first segment that you talked about, is everyone's fresh for that, right? So like some people are going to go all out for it and just drop themselves going for that FAL. So that's another reason why you may consider not going for that first one, which I think he did a good job at.
yeah, especially in B category, there's always the group who, has a 12 or a 13 watt per kilogram sprint, but they're 3.5s or something along those lines near the bottom of the
Right.
category. And I call those the one and done guys. They'll stay with the group until the first prime, go all out for it, and then they sit up, and that's their race basically. Not Will's strategy, obviously, but I'm sure there were a fair number in this group who are going for that. Unfortunately, in this particular one, there was no power up to use before that, so those guys probably didn't have very much success. But here we are in sprint 2. Again, Will without a power up since he used that steamroller earlier, but he's putting out 700 plus watts here, and he's got a
Yeah.
good kick.
Yeah, these are really big numbers, actually. I would actually say in this case, like, I don't think you're going to get FTS without a power up. Obviously, you can maybe gamble for FAL, but without a power up, anything is kind of risky. I would have liked him to maybe start a little bit closer to the front of the pack, so he didn't have to do that 700 watt effort. So he had that in the bag for when he did have an arrow to actually go for some points. But I can't really nitpick too much. He's very comfortably in the pack right now.
Yeah. So
Um,
do you think there, had he held on to his steamroller and positioned himself maybe 15th or so, going around the corner, do you think he had a chance, with the numbers that he just put out to snag some FAL points there?
I think so, and I briefly looked at the field. There's nobody really at like 15, 16 watts a kilo here. So I think if he positioned himself with that front surge per se of riders, I think 750 watts would have probably catapulted him towards the top five riders, and he would have definitely had a shot. The other thing about the steamroller too is right after that banner hits, there's a descent. And descending on the cobbles in a super tuck actually slows you down a lot, as we've learned. And if you drop the steamroller, you're able to actually super tuck right after the banner as well. If you want to just use it just to help yourself recover after the sprint and just stay more comfortably in the pack, because then you'll be descending on road rather than on cobbles with this steamroller effect. So yeah, the steamroller wasn't completely useless, but it definitely wasn't the best one for the sprint, and he used it up anyway. So in this case, like, I think it's possible he could have gone for FAL. I probably would have just waited for another lap. A, everyone's a little bit more tired, gives you a better chance, and B, you didn't have the best power up to start with, even if you did keep your steamroller.
Sure. Okay, so no harm then, playing that one as he did. I mean, he put up a pretty big effort, so they're just going to feel that in the legs a little bit, but he's got his
Yeah,
heart rate
I
back
think he did
now.
a little bit more than he had to, and that's the one point I will say. Like, if he could just save that for lap 3 or 4, I feel like he's getting FAL even first place, with an arrow. So
Sure.
that's just a little bit of a nitpick, but he was comfortably in the pack, and he didn't really go for FAL. So I think it was a yeah, it wasn't anything too bad.
Yeah, and so he's got the heart rate back down under the 150s, which this seems to be his nice comfortable zone.
Right.
He's not doing too much, but this right here we slowed down because this is basically the first attack of the race. This is one guy going off the front up this hill. And this is the shallower part, but it's still uphill. He uses his feather here. My concern is that he doesn't look like he's struggling here at all. The group is not responding to the attack, and he's comfortably in the middle, still not putting out too many watts. So do you think hold on to that? Because now there are a couple guys chasing, and he might start to struggle a little bit more.
Yeah, I think he was in a comfortable position. I probably would have waited for the second step of this climb per se, just because that's usually when the effort starts to bite, and we'll see his heart rate kind of climb here, like close to 180s, and that's when you really want the most respite, right? It's when it gets the hardest, the steepest, but also like towards the end of a climb in general, like I like to keep my power ups until I need them, and that's usually when you need it, right? Is towards the end of the climb. And here you see it actually hit 4%, which is the highest the gradient will go here. And so I always say like this place right here to tack back onto that group up front would be the best place to use it. He used it on the climb, so again we're kind of nitpicking a little bit, but I do agree. I think keeping it for a little bit longer would have been the right move here.
Yeah. I mean, real small problem in this one. Like again, he's using it going uphill, and that'd be the biggest concern is if he used
Right.
it going downhill while sitting comfortably in the pack or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But he's okay. He's got two teammates here around him. One of them just dropped a steamroller, so he can just latch on, and that should easily get him back up to the front because it looks like it's settled down a lot on the front. Nobody's chasing too hard.
Yeah.
But if you look at what's going on behind him,
Yeah, he's on the back of a split. He got a little bit lucky, I would say, actually.
he
I
is
would have personally,
last
again,
for
wanted him to be a little bit further because you never know where those breaks are going to be. I mean, you mentioned he had teammates here, and we're assuming they're all not, all three of them aren't going to get dropped. Neil and E-Rob are pretty strong riders, so yeah, I think he was fine, but I would have liked to see him a little bit more front.
Yeah. And that effort obviously hurt him a little bit. He's up in 180s before he's even sprinting here, but he's still popping off 600 watts plus. So this is his weakest so far, but this is, best positioning for him. The group's shredded a little bit, so he's
Yeah.
doesn't have too many people to compete with. And he still, he ended up top 15 probably there. So that to me proves that he's got it in him to go after these FAL points if he does it right. And here he used the steamroller basically right after he got it, which it goes back to what you were saying. He was able to super tuck and not really lose much ground. So I think that was pretty reasonable. This section of the course, obviously, you get another one right away, and as we said, the steamroller is not really something that's worth holding on to. Not bad, but not a net plus. So
Yeah, and I think he did, a perfect, like he did an effort there that was perfect to keep him in that front group comfortably. And he didn't waste any watts. I would say like he can maybe time his super tech a little bit better with the trainer lag, but that's a pretty advanced kind of skill that takes a lot of practice to do. I think he just super tucked like 2 seconds after he could have. But that's again a little bit of a nitpick, but I think he used up the steamroller like he should have, and now he's sitting on an arrow.
yeah, and this is his first arrow, if I remember right, for the whole race. So he's gotten a little bit unlucky with his power up so far, but he's got an arrow here. Still plenty more opportunities. So your strategy for this, if you're him or even what you did, if say you got an arrow going through the sprint,
Mm-hmm.
do you just sit on it until the next sprint, or
Oh,
do you use them every single time?
no, 100% sit on it. I mean, it's a downhill. You're going 60 kilometers an hour after that sprint. You shouldn't really be getting dropped, especially if nobody is pushing the pace anyway. It's a fine place. I actually would just use my feather even in that little right before the start finish banner there, because I'm so obsessed about getting arrows on this sprinters course, right? Like that's the power up to have. So I'm sitting on an arrow until every sprint. And you know, as the race winds down, I'm probably sitting on an arrow for the finish and on the last couple laps too.
Right. Yeah. So you forego the last maybe 1 or 2 sprints if you get an arrow just to ensure that you have it for the final, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of other people in the race are doing the same. So for you to go to the finish without an arrow is actually a pretty big disadvantage, I would say. And especially if you don't have the best pop in the group, I would say like hang on to that arrow for dear life in the last 3 laps, probably 2 to 3 laps.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're not intending to compete for FAL or FTS, which,
Right.
you know, I'd say he's like indecisively competing for them. He's putting up big sprint numbers, but it looks like he's not quite committed to, you know, to being at the front for FAL or to starting in the back and going through the pack for FTS. So he's
Hmm.
maybe needs to formulate his plan a little bit better going into the race, and just pick a lane and stick with it. But you know, again, he's staying front group, and maybe that's what he was doing. You know, when I talked to him, he said, you know, he was holding on for dear life, and that was a good enough strategy for him now. But as he refines his, you know, Zwift craft and his racing strategies and gets more into this and gets more comfortable holding on to the front group,
Hmm.
then you can start getting a little bit more selective about how you go about this and where you can pick up points and how you can best help the team. So
Yeah, no, it's definitely a learning curve, but yeah, here we're at a sprint. He drops the arrow and he's at the back of the pack, so I would assume this position means he's going for FTS. Um, I would say he popped his highest numbers a little bit too late though here. You know, you saw him hit 700 well after the sprint started. And in general, whenever you're going for FTS, you want to be as fast as possible, actually, even before you enter the segment, right? This is a longer sprint, but I would have liked him to see him at higher watts earlier, and even right before the sprint started, rather than still having 600 watts in the bag right at the banner.
right, so be moving forward through the pack at, you know, probably 80%, 90% of your peak as you're going across the banner, because
Hmm.
that'll be, or sorry, the start line, not the banner, because that'll
Yeah.
be kind of max speed for you. And ultimately, you'll probably end up running out of guys to draft off of as you approach the front. But that also means that you've gone extremely fast through that segment. So you probably end up getting on that board. But I
Right.
mean, he did it right. He timed the arrow at the right spot. He started in the back. Again, small nitpick here. He just probably should hit that 700 plus number
A little bit
4
earlier.
seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, 4 seconds before he did, 5 seconds before he did, maybe.
Yeah. And actually,
Um,
when I'm going for these FTS, and you know, we saw Diddy do the same thing on the channel earlier. He, you know, I like to spike at the highest watts actually right before the sprint, because you know that's when you're actually going the slowest for the next 15 seconds, right? If you're talking about a 15-second effort, the highest watts should be at the start to get you up to speed. And so at that point, you should kind of be at the back of the pack and just put your head down and go, like 100% go. Don't worry about, you know, where you are in the pack. Don't worry about anybody else. At that point, it's just 15 seconds and that's it, right? So you spike as hard as you can when you're going, you know, 45, 50 kilometers an hour to get you up to speed. And then you just hold on for dear life until, you know, you see the banner cross. And even if you taper off at the end, it takes, you know, as long as you're doing 400, 500 watts, you're actually not going to slow down much, even if you're going 60 kilometers an hour. So, yeah, I would say just kind of move that effort a little bit earlier to time it right before the start of a sprint segment if you're going for FTS. Obviously, FAL is a different conversation, but
Yeah, yeah. You know, and I think that's actually a really cool way to look at it. You know, you want the watts that you're putting out to be sort of inversely proportional to the speed that you're going. Never really
right.
thought of it in those terms, but that actually does make a lot of sense. And often, if you do that, if you have a good FTS segment, the FAL sort of takes care of itself anyway. Especially in a smaller group like this, they're down to what, like 30 people in this group.
Yeah.
You know, it's gone ripped to shreds as this thing's gone along. They're dropping a handful of people every single sprint. So
Yeah,
he's got
this
a
this this group is definite. I think it's split right where we kind of paused it last time. And every single lap they're shedding a few riders, so it's definitely not easy. But Will's heart rate is pretty comfy right now, I would say. So he's doing a great job at drafting between the segments so far.
Yeah, and we should take a second to talk about that because obviously we highlighted at the beginning of this, one of his probably worst moments, and he has done just amazingly well this whole race at keeping himself under control, recovering, sitting in the draft. I mean, I don't think I've seen him hit put his nose in the wind once this entire
No.
race, which
Yep.
you really never should unless you're deliberately attacking or your team is. There's absolutely no reason to do that, or you're chasing down a break or whatever it happens to be.
Right.
But
Or you're
here's
going
here's
for FAL here, but yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so here's basically attack number two of this race. This one, it looks like the same thing we said with Diddy's race. As the race goes along, the group tends to be a bit more attentive to these.
Hmm.
It doesn't, it's stringing out a little bit as we go up this hill, but it doesn't appear that anybody really wants to just sit back and let this one go. So,
Yeah, and
he's
you see a lot of like similar team jerseys here, like Team F3, I think is it there. I mean, there's a lot of yellow jerseys here in general with the TFC and I think Team F3 here, but you see a lot of teammates here. So I would be comfortable just knowing it would come back and just make sure I'm in the right position here so I don't get dropped off the back.
yeah, and then you see there is a little gap forming, and this far back with all the power ups being dropped and everybody's names, I can't tell how many people it is, but I would guess probably two or three people up there based on the size of the blob, and
Yeah.
it was separated a little bit there. As as we're going up towards the top of this hill, I think there's a lapped rider here who gets dropped and will come back through the group as well. So it's really hard to kind of keep track of who is where, who is who. So if I'm Will, I'm doing exactly what he's doing here. I'm staying up probably towards the front third of this group, and really just making sure that I'm attentive and that they're, especially given how this race went earlier, where we saw right around here that he ended up on the back of the pack with a
Hmm.
split immediately behind him, and that probably was about half of the race that dropped off right
Yeah.
on his wheel. So he was a little bit fortunate, like you said, and that was a big effort up that hill. So I'm fine with him dropping this steamroller early here. Again, that was a high effort, high heart rate already going into this sprint, and I think right now he's in survival mode. Doesn't have an arrow. He's uh, you know got a small pack to sprint with, but again, I think right now he's more interested in just making sure he stays up here than getting FAL points.
Yeah, and I think that steamroller drop was almost perfect as you'll see it kind of, maybe a little bit later, but it's almost right at the banner where it finishes because it is a longer power up anyway. So he was able to rest a little bit more in the lead into the sprint and still pop off a really solid sprint here. Again, with the steamroller, you're not going to get FTS, unfortunately. But yeah, he's comfortable in the pack here. Got another steamroller though, so
Yeah, he's just had some bad luck from a power up perspective. This is one of the real downsides of, I guess, Zwift right now, or I can't say ZRL specifically, but Zwift right now is just the randomness of this
yeah.
can dictate a lot of how the race ends up. You can still play it smart, like the guy who just dropped an arrow right there next to him as the F3 guy. That's
That
just not
hurts.
smart. Yeah,
That
that
hurts.
one.
As a sprinter, I'm cringing very hard at that. But
Right.
maybe he
Squirrels
was at 198 beats per minute and wanted another power up.
could be. And hey, look, Will's back down in the 140s again. So
Yeah,
he's
beautifully
recovered
recovering.
already from that effort. So feeling good. Sitting on a feather on this one. Again, he's deployed these on the uphill. Do you think that a feather is a worthwhile? Say nobody attacks here, it stays relatively blobbed up, and he's comfortably in the group.
Yeah.
Do you use this for the sprint and to try to go for something with it?
Yeah, I think so. That's a very nuanced question for this course specifically. I think there's a couple of things to bear in mind. One, having something rather than nothing is always better when the race gets the hardest. In this case, it's every time everyone goes for the sprint. So you always want to keep something to help yourself in those moments, whether you're going for points or whether you're just trying to survive, right? Like you always want to make sure the hardest efforts in a race aren't going to kill you, right? So you try to make it easier for yourself. The second part about a feather, and this kind of bothers me too, is when people just uh, you know, I guess like in a sprint, right? Um, it takes away, I believe it's 10% of your weight.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty significant amount, right? So Will is about 70 kilos. You're talking about changing his weight from 70 kilos to 63 kilograms. And if he's still doing 700 watts, to accelerate, you would accelerate a 63 kilogram rider much faster with 700 watts than a 70 kilogram rider with 700 watts, right? So it's definitely useful in a sprint. Nowhere near an arrow at this high speed sprint, but at the same time, it's definitely not nothing, and it'll help accelerate you faster, especially if you're trying to go through the pack or you're just trying to stay more comfortable in the pack itself.
Yeah, and as we saw, what, a couple days ago when I posted Diddy's video, he won the A1 race on the
Yeah.
flat run into the finish here with a feather against a bunch of guys with arrows. Now, granted, it helps that he has Wolverine's healing ability to recover, and
Yeah.
he can pop off 16 watts a kilogram at any point that he wants to. But yeah, I'm with you. I guess that was more for my own information here. Like I rarely sprint with a feather either.
Yeah.
It's for
The last
me.
thing, yeah.
I was gonna say I
Sorry.
always associate it with uphill, and
Yeah.
it's something that I think a lot of people could benefit from, just thinking through it more tactfully, and instead of using it like Will is here on one of the shallower areas of this climb, while he's sitting comfortably in there, hold on to it and use it, like you said, when the race gets even harder on the
Mhm.
sprint section.
Again, just holding it for another 5 seconds probably would have been the right time. You see all the feathers kind of pop, and if you're the only one popping a feather, that might be like an indication that you're not on the steepest part of the climb, and the hardest part is yet to come, right? Whether somebody's holding the feather to attack, or it's just going to be a harder part of the climb right now. So I would definitely say he should have held the feather for a little bit longer. Going back to what you said about feather for steep bits and uphills. I think that's a big misconception people have, right? I think even in a downhill sprint, if you're putting out 700 watts, a 63 kilogram rider is actually going to go faster if you're doing way more watts per kilo, right? So even then, it accelerates you downhill faster as well. Now, if you're super tucking, obviously never use a feather because you want to use your weight to super tuck, or if you're just kind of noodling at 2, 3 watts a kilogram on a descent, that's not going to help you with the feather. But at the same time, if you're accelerating and sprinting, 100%, it's going to accelerate you faster. Obviously, uphill is more useful, but even downhill at shallow gradients, it's definitely useful to accelerate yourself.
Yeah, so really, I guess it's just the conception of the feathers usage is you think of it more as acceleration than climbing or than even weight loss or whatever it is,
Yeah,
and I
it
think that's
just
just a mindset that
it
requires.
increases your watts per kilo, right? So that's kind
Right.
of how I think of it.
Yeah. So here's the next sprint. He was fairly casual through that one. That was another hard chase up that hill that looked like a couple guys attacking, with a lot of people responding with feathers. And again, as we said, he probably used his a little bit too early there, and he was chasing on the back there, probably struggling a little bit to hang on. So probably not a whole lot left in the legs after 5 or 6 sprints and that hard climb. And right here, this is probably the worst thing that happened in this race for Will. He just dropped that arrow uh, in between segments on the downhill when he was already in the draft, and we're going into the final lap. And as we just discussed, you want to hold on to the arrow for the sprints, for the sprint at the top of the hill, or again on this lap, since we're on the run into the finish. Uh, I would sit on it until the bitter end here. I assume you're the same.
Yeah, 100%. And I understand why Will did it. I think in the moment, it was probably the hardest part of the race, right? We're 51 minutes in, his heart rate is at like 170, but every single time it's come down to 140s, right? And so I feel like he just has to trust that it's going to stay easy. The race is going to stay easy and he's going to be able to recover because he has every single time, right? And so in that situation, I feel like the adrenaline and the heart rate that he was at and just the pain in his legs, the lactate and everything is just screaming at him, just make it easier, make it easier. And he was towards the back as well. But at the same time, a quick 300 watt spike in power and you're back super tucking straight into the pack Whereas you saw the arrow just kind of put him all the way to the front, and for no reason really, in my opinion, because nobody was attacking at that point. And even if they did, you're going 60 kilometers an hour. That attack's not going anywhere. So I understand why he did it, and the pain kind of forced him to. But I would just trust yourself, right? Trust yourself that you're going to recover. Trust yourself that you have a higher FTP than a lot of people in this field, actually. And if it's hard for them, if it's hard for you, it's definitely hard for them as well. So yeah, I would have tried to sit on it for sure.
Yeah, and that point specifically that you made at the end is one that I think we all struggle with, especially on Zwift.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get out of your own head and realize that it's also hard for everybody else. You're always just assume that everybody else looks like their avatar does on screen, not a drop of sweat, chilling, riding as if it's the first pedal stroke. But it's almost guaranteed that every single one of these riders, just by virtue of the fact that they're in this race, in the BCAT race, is feeling the same thing that you are, if not even worse. Because again, like we discussed, Will's pretty close to the top of the category. He's able to put down 4.1 for 20 minutes, which puts him squarely above, probably 80% of BCAT riders in the world. So, I think you're right. The trust factor needs to be a thing, and then also, just always make the assumption that it's just as hard for everybody else, if not harder. And even if it's not, look at your positioning. He was in the draft. He was doing okay. Again, I think he'd be really well served to have it right now. Now I am proud he was drifting off the back. I'm proud that he didn't panic and use the steamroller right there. He had a teammate on the back with him who was giving him a wheel. So he owes E-Rob a beer, I think, after that one, and he stayed on and didn't panic. And so we'll let this one play out all the way to the end. So this is basically the run-in, which includes the sprint here at the top, and this is the final sprint that comes about 1.5 kilometers from the finish. So usually this one you wouldn't expect it to be hard, or not nearly as hard as all the previous ones.
Yeah, and I think if you're not expecting to get a top 5, which to be honest, I think Will could have possibly gotten a top 5 if he was perfectly positioned with an arrow, or even a top 10. But if you're not fighting for the top 3, 4, 5, finishing spots, the way ZRL works is going FAL, first across that sprint where nobody is trying is actually 10 extra points, right?
Mhm.
And considering you still stay in the pack and you still finish wherever you finish, I mean, you're guaranteed a top 23 here, I think. That's 10, that 10 points means a lot for a team. So I could even see him going for that sprint before the finish, and then just trying to, grind it out to the finish. But here he decides to play the finish game.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting in this race too. There's a big group that just got gapped off the back in that final sprint too.
Yeah. Did he
But
get
yeah,
a power up, or did he use it up already? I think I missed that.
this was the one where he had the feather, and it's hard
Gotcha.
to see because he didn't use it. He bent it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the thought process is there. As you said earlier, something is better than nothing.
Yeah, and you see a lot of people using feathers here too. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if one of these feathers got them a top 3, top 4 place. There's like half the people with feathers here. So
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean he's going to put out 500, 600 watts here in this sprint, which is close to 10 watts a kilogram for him. So it's not nothing, especially right on the heels of another sprint. And I think he ends up 15th or so in this race. So really, really solid finish for him. He
yeah,
3.4 for him is pretty well within his comfort zone. He clearly looks tired, and we have the benefit of being able to see everything that Will's
got
experienced.
his
But
workout in,
he
definitely.
did. Finished top on his team. You can see 4 guys in the front group there from TFC. But this dropped his race ranking something like 70 points, and so obviously one of his better results ever. And I think he's going to come out of that one really proud. And I think just as we discussed, a few tweaks to power up usage and deployment and positioning within the field, and he's easily looking at a top 5 here in the very near future.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is this power page here. Actually, he put out 10.8 watts per kilo at some point in the race, and there are not that many guys above even 11 here, right? So the guy who won was 10.5, right, for 15 seconds. So I think he could have probably timed the end sprint a little bit better too, especially if you don't have a power up and you don't have the strongest kick to just catapult yourself to the front of a pack like maybe Diddy Diddy has that luxury. It's yeah, it's maybe start your sprint a little bit earlier so you're in that front pack of people accelerating and they'll just kind of pull you a little bit further.
Yeah, and this one comes so quickly after the sprint. It's I'll be honest, even when I was riding it, I was like, oh my gosh, we're already sprinting. I totally forgot that we had to do that because you get into that nice little rhythm where you sprint and then you get to recover. But that final sprint comes right at the end.
Yeah.
And anyway, still great race for him.
Yeah.
We
No, he
nitpick
should
a lot, but
no,
we're
he should be super proud, I think, for having one of his best race results on a non-climbing stage. Like I think he did exceptionally well in the epic too after an hour of racing, whatever that was too. And then again to back that up with the sprint stage top 20 is really impressive. And I think one thing that helped him tremendously is his ability to draft this time. He never hit the front whenever he didn't have to. And I would be surprised if he didn't do as close to as little as Watts as he could have done in this race.
yeah.
Sometimes he's a little bit further back than we wanted him to, but again, I think he did an exceptional job at drafting, and he did an exceptional job to stay with the pack on a sprinter stage.
Yeah, agreed. He was 3.4 for the race. There were a couple guys around 3.2, but he was right down there. And he's a lighter guy too, so it's usually requires a little bit more watts per kilogram to stay in. So I would say that's among the best in that race. And, a dramatic improvement over the course of just a few weeks, even. So kudos, Will. You did a really great job. We nitpick here because we strive for perfection. So hopefully you can take some of this to heart, and hopefully everybody else learned something here along the way. Z, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks
Really
for having
enjoyed it.
me again. I
Yeah,
enjoyed this
man.
as well.
Yeah, we'll do it again for sure. Obviously, people keep sending these in. We'll find things to
For sure.
critique. And thanks for watching, everybody. So I'd say just like, subscribe, share. Anything you saw that we didn't, or anything you disagree with, let us know in the comments, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.